How does a company go from being a tiny, struggling startup to a global giant that completely changes the way we all watch movies and TV? Well, today we're diving into the incredible story of Netflix and the radical, sometimes really controversial, culture that fueled its constant reinvention.
So to really get this, I want you to picture it. The year is 2000. We're in a Dallas boardroom. Netflix co-founder Reed Hastings is about to pitch a partnership to the undisputed king of home entertainment, Blockbuster. And he is, understandably, a nervous wreck. And for a very, very good reason.
This was the ultimate underdog story. You had this global behemoth, Blockbuster, with a store on practically every corner. And then you had this tiny startup, Netflix, that was just hemorrhaging money.
And when you look at the numbers, the difference in scale is just staggering. Back in 2000, Netflix had a mere 300,000 subscribers and was on track to lose $57 million. Blockbuster, on the other hand, had the brand, the power, all the resources. On paper, it wasn't even a fair fight.
So that really brings us to the core question here, the mystery we're unpacking. How in the world did this happen? How did David not just beat Goliath, but actually become the new Goliath?
Now, the answer you usually hear is that Netflix was just really, really good at adapting its business model. And look, that's absolutely true, but it's only a tiny part of the real story.
We all remember the journey, right? First, it was those iconic red envelopes showing up in our mailboxes. Then, boom, 2007, they pivot to streaming. And just when we thought that was it, 2013 hits and they dropped their first original series, House of Cards, basically becoming a full-blown Hollywood studio overnight.
But here's the thing you have to understand. Those pivots, they're just the what. They don't explain the why. They don't tell us why Netflix was able to make these huge leaps, while a giant like Blockbuster just couldn't adapt and ended up going bankrupt in 2010.
Because the real secret, the engine behind all of that incredible change, it wasn't some business strategy you'd learn in a textbook. It was a deeply ingrained and frankly kind of weird corporate culture they call freedom and responsibility.
So, here's how it starts. It begins in a place we all recognize, with a simple, familiar goal. Their philosophy literally says, like every company, we try to hire well. Okay, sounds pretty normal, right?
But then you see this. Adequate performance gets a generous severance package. Whoa, that is not your typical HR poster. This is a core belief that values top performers so much that it basically screams, this is a high-stakes, high-pressure environment.
And this whole idea is boiled down into something called the keeper test. Managers are constantly asking themselves this question. And if the honest answer is that they wouldn't fight to keep someone, well, that person is let go with a nice severance to make room for someone they consider a star. It's ruthless, for sure, and a lot of critics say it can create a culture of fear. But for Netflix, it's the absolute bedrock of their whole system.
It all breaks down into three core pillars. First, you build talent density by only keeping the absolute best people, using things like that keeper test. Second, you increase radical candor, which means encouraging intensely direct and honest feedback. And only after you have that foundation of elite talent and trust, only then can you do the third thing, remove controls, like vacation policies and expense reports.
Okay, so that's the theory. It sounds intense, but how does a culture like this, a bunch of high performers with basically no rulebook, actually work when things go wrong?
Well, let's look at a perfect example, the great pricing disaster of 2011. This is where you can see that whole idea of failing, learning, and adapting play out in real time.
So in 2011, Netflix completely botched a price increase and lost a staggering 800,000 subscribers. It was a total public relations disaster. But inside this kind of culture, failure is just data. So they learned. By 2017, they raised prices again, but this time they smashed subscriber forecasts, and they did it again in 2019, proving they had totally mastered what almost broke them.
And this is the key takeaway. A culture filled with high performers who are given freedom and responsibility isn't afraid to make big bets and sometimes fail spectacularly. Sure, the pressure is immense, but in return, you get this unparalleled ability to learn and pivot. That agility, that's their superpower.
But does this intense, high-stakes culture actually pay off in the long run? Really? Well, the numbers, they tell a pretty clear story.
Let's rewind to 2007, when Netflix launched its streaming service. They had about 7.5 million subscribers. Pretty respectable for the time. Fast forward to 2020, that number, it exploded to over 200 million subscribers around the globe. That kind of growth is just breathtaking. And the money followed. The company's revenue went from just under $1 billion in 2007 to $25 billion by 2020. That's the result of constant, relentless reinvention.
I mean, the connection is impossible to ignore. Their unique cultural bet that if you hire the best and give them freedom in a high-stakes environment paid off in one of the most remarkable growth stories we've ever seen.
Which, of course, leaves us with one last fascinating question. Is the Netflix way a blueprint for modern companies? Or is it maybe a cautionary tale about the human cost of chasing perfection? Could this kind of culture actually work anywhere else?
In the end, Reed Hastings himself probably says it best. It was never just about DVDs or streaming. The one thing they had, the one thing that truly mattered, was a culture built not just to survive, but to thrive in a world that absolutely never stops changing.